Hello guys, today I'm gonna present you a type of rook endgame, and that is the side cut. Mm. Side cut. We are going to include a little bit about file cuts, but yeah, they are both about cuts. So yeah. The first example I want to show you is is the is a basic idea about it. So here it's just a loss because now after king g3, as you can see, we are cutting along the fourth row, and so the position is easily winning out, and we get a Lucina after king h6, rook h1, king g7, rook king f3, something like that, rook b4, rook a1, g6, and we're about to get a Lucina position. So, no wait, actually we don't need to get a Lucina position because after something like rook a5, king h7, rook h5, king g8, rook here, king g7, and here we're just basically winning. Okay, we're just winning. So so I think you can get a basic idea of what a side cut look like. Here, back to position. I'll give you a moment to understand it clearly because we're about to move over to the more complicated positions. Okay, we're about to move on. Let's go. So here is it's more complicated because now it should there are two ways acting. uh, it could be black to move and white to move, and still both white still wins. Okay, white still wins both. White still wins both, and so now black has two options, king e5 and king e6. The more normal option would be to play king e6, and this would result in king g4, rook h1. You always win active defense. Okay, but now we play rook f4, and this is one of the file cuts that I said that we are going to have a small part in. File cuts are just the same, but just more easy, and we're not gonna cover this topic under my presence. Okay. Okay, so here, so king e6, king g4, but I want to remind you, king e5 here. Oh yeah, and the bad would be rook takes g5, rook a5, and oh no, oh no, oh no. Okay, okay. So here, um, so here king um, so here with to black to play will be king e5, king g4, rook h1, and I'll tell you one way you can mess this up. It's rook f4, rook f4, rook g1, and now you're actually losing. You should, is you're actually losing. So here rook a6, and now we get a normal side cut, and I want you to say that the side cut, the opposing king must be on the same row as our passed pawn, or else it won't work. I'll tell you that. Yes, it won't work. It will not work, as I will show you. As if king e6, king g4 here, uh, rook h1. Some of you will go for the side code rook a7, and then you will say, "Oh, Oxy, this move is easily winning. I'm not gonna calculate any further." Well, you're because you think because you think that it is side cut. However, now the king is not on the same rank as the pawn, so this is not good. Black, because the second g6 comes, king f6 comes, and the g and black picks up the g6 goner. So black can just shuffle over with rook h2 and then rook h1 back. Yeah, rook h2, rook h1. So you must remember that. Okay, because let's continue. Here, I'll discuss a few details with you. The second black plays b5, he's win because he get a side cut, but he must be careful because, as you can see, the rook is semi-cutting the king from the sixth row, and now and so he must the sixth rank. I want to say bro, the sixth rank, and so here he must play king c7 because he must play be careful. b5 immediately draws. You might think, oh, see, this is a normal side cut. Well, but king e5, king c7, king d5, and now even though black's rook cuts the fourth rank, which is a good side cut, the black king is also getting cut along the sixth rank. So this is actually a draw. We can white can just wait on the sixth rank until black plays b4 and go back and play king c5, rook c6 at a dead draw. Okay. So the correct move is actually king c7, and this the idea of this is to go over king b7 and king a6 and then king b5 or king a5, king a, yep, and then we will be able to move our rook, and then if allowed, move our king and d5. If but white has one way to get to try to keep the game going, and that is king d5, king b7, king d5, king a6. Now rook g6, and most of you will try to wait, but wait is not a good idea, because now black will think black will think, oh white, thank you, you just made my test easier by tenfold. You know why? Because after king a5 and b5, we've got a normal side cut, and now and now white's just losing. But a more solid defense would be rook h1, and now but rook h1, b5 is a winner. b5 is a winner. Okay, but yeah, more solid does not mean you cannot break through. But rook g4, though it still wins, now black must be careful, because after rook a1, sorry, I'm just clicked. After rook a1, then here king b7 would be a dead draw. It will be a dead draw because king b5 still winner, king b5, and now rook b1, rook b4, and even though the king's on the wrong spot here, after rook a1, rook a4, we still get the king to a5 and win. But do you know why king b7 is a draw? Because the king has no way to go up, and when it has no way to go up, then black's rook and pawn alone can't do anything. It just can't do anything. So you should never leave your king away from the action. Okay. So after rook g6, like I said, which was easily losing, then king a5. Yeah. So now we go to the fourth. We go to the fourth ending. Now the fourth ending, though, here is you might feel familiar. It's actually from the number 2 position, and that the rook was on a4 and it went over to f4 to create a file cut. But here it's on a7. So do you know what the result will be? Yes, it's a draw, because the rook is controlling this the h file, and there's no way to break through. So he can just shuffle with rook h2 and rook h1, etc. Chapter 5 now. Rook f1 was easily winning, but that's not under our topic. So I thought that many of you and me would try to play rook a3 to create a side cut. But king f4, king d4, rook e1, d5. But now the second black's pawn gets d4, it's a win. Yeah. So here he's got to play rook c1. If the king was on d6, the rook c1 would also be the only move to draw, because it is stopping the king from playing king c5 and d4. Now rook b3 is very close to zugzwang, because now if the rook If the white rook goes somewhere c7, c8, c6, then the king goes to d3 and d4 wins. But if rook h1, then there's king c4, and if it check, then rook c1, and then d4 also wins. And if you move the king, then you lose control of one of these important squares, and then the king will infiltrate viable squares. Some of you will panic and think, "Oh no, I'm losing." And if this on online, you'll also ask, "Yeah, I'll just resign this position. I don't know what to do, so I'm just losing." And no, chess is not of despair. It's of creativity, and that is why we have the move rook a1. The we have enough checking space, and so after king c3, he's got a shape out of king by king c3, and then something like king b2 and king c2, and that takes 2 tempi. In that time, we can use our king to pick up the pawn. Okay, but we can easily pick up the pawn. So now, we go to the sixth and the last theoretical that I can do it. And now we move one file over, and now can you see the winning move? I'll give you a hint here. If the white rook goes here, then there we have king c3 and c4 and win. If the rook goes here, then we've got something like king b3, king c2 and win. And if the king moves, then king d3 wins. If then king d3 wins. So can you see the correct move? Yes, it's rook g3. And now, after even if we give white one tempo with rook a1 and rook a4, he won't be able to consolidate it because our king only needs one tempo to be stable, compared to the last example where it needed 2 tempi to be stable. And so here this position is winning. Okay, so here now, this is a test position. I made it. I made it for myself. And can you see the winning position? This might be met of by a lot of people. So I think can you see the position, the drawing move for whites? Yes, it's rook a1 again. Again, the king now needs two tempi to be stabilized, and in that time we can use our king to pluck the pawn. Yeah, and so after king c5, rook a5, then the position is a draw. It's a very dead draw, and so white black has no way of making progress. And so that ends our topic for Rook Endgames side cuts. And I hope this was useful for you. And see you next time. Bye bye.